Hey everyone, and welcome back for another deep dive.
It's great to be here.
Today we're going to be talking all about software architecture.
Oh, nice.
We're diving deep into 97 things every software architect should know.
But classic.
It really is. Good architecture is like the foundation of any successful software project.
Oh, absolutely.
Right. But with tech changing so fast these days,
Yeah.
it's hard to know what principles are timeless and which ones might be on their way out.
Right.
So that's where you come in. You're going to help us figure out which pieces of wisdom from this book are the most useful, for all of us out there building software.
You're absolutely right. The tech world is constantly changing. But what's interesting is that a lot of the core challenges of software architecture stay the same.
Yeah.
And this book, even though it's been around for a while, it addresses those enduring challenges. We're talking about things like balancing technical needs with business goals, making decisions even when you're not sure what the future holds, and communicating effectively with stakeholders, all those things that keep an architect up at night.
Okay, so let's jump into these excerpts then and see what we can find. A lot of them seem to be about the mindset of a software architect.
Yeah.
It's not just about being a coding whiz, right?
Definitely not just about coding. Although a deep understanding of technology is essential.
Right.
John Davies, he makes a good point when he says, an architect without technical depth is just a project manager. And you need that street cred, that ability to get your hands dirty and understand how the systems work.
Yeah.
Imagine if you tried to design a bridge, but you didn't know anything about the materials or structural engineering, it wouldn't work.
That makes total sense. So it's like you have to speak the language of the developers and, understand the challenges and then make decisions that are practical and technically sound.
Yeah.
I bet there's more to it than just being a tech expert, though.
Absolutely. One of the biggest challenges for an architect is balancing all those different priorities you have to juggle.
Oh, yeah.
Randy Stafford uses this great analogy of the Vasa ship. You know that 17th century Swedish warship that sank on its very first voyage?
Oh, right. Yeah.
They added way too many cannons. It made it top heavy. And it's a reminder that as an architect, you're always balancing technical needs and what the stakeholders want, budget constraints, and timelines. Have you ever felt that pressure to add just one more feature?
Oh, yeah.
Even if you know it might make the whole project unstable. It's a tough balancing act.
Oh, I can definitely relate to that. Sometimes you get so excited about all the cool things you could build
Right.
that you forget about those practical constraints.
Yeah.
And, speaking of things that can ground you in reality, there's a lot of emphasis in these excerpts about understanding the business side of things.
That's key. Dave Muirhead and Mark Richards, they both talk about how the goals of the business should really be driving the architectural decisions.
Okay.
Without deeply understanding that business domain, you're basically designing in a vacuum.
Yeah.
It's like trying to build a house without knowing who's going to live in it or how they plan to use the space. You could end up with a beautiful structure that's totally impractical for the people who actually need to live there.
So it's not just about building a cool, impressive system. It's about building a system that actually helps the organization reach its goals and, solves real business problems.
Exactly.
That makes me think, have you ever had any experiences where a disconnect between the business needs and the technical solutions caused problems?
Oh, I've seen that happen many times.
Yeah.
I'm thinking of one project, this complex data warehousing system. We built this incredibly sophisticated platform.
Wow.
All the bells and whistles. But we didn't really fully understand how the business users were going to use the data, how they were going to analyze it.
Oh.
We ended up having to redo big chunks of the system because we didn't really consider that user experience from their perspective.
Yeah.
It was a painful lesson
Oh, wow.
in how important it is to really make sure those technical solutions match up with the business needs.
That's such a good example. It really highlights how important it is for architects to not just, stay in their technical bubble, but to really talk to and engage with the people who are actually going to be using the system.
Yeah, absolutely.
And, speaking of engagement, another theme that comes up in these excerpts is the importance of communication.
Yeah.
It's not enough to just have the right answer, right?
Right.
You have to get your ideas across effectively.
Absolutely. You hit the nail on the head there. Mark Richards has this great axiom, he says. Communication is king, clarity and leadership, it's humble servants.
I like that.
Even the most brilliant architectural design is worthless if you can't explain it and get people on board.
Right.
You need to communicate your vision clearly and concisely and in a way that makes sense to your audience, whether they're developers or stakeholders or business users.
I can see how that could be challenging. There are so many different perspectives and levels of understanding to consider. Have you found any like strategies that are particularly helpful for communicating these complex architectural ideas?
One technique I've found really helpful, and this comes from Udi Dahan's stand-up axiom,
Okay.
is to literally stand up when
Mm-hmm.
you're communicating your ideas.
Okay.
It may seem like a small thing,
Yeah.
but it can really change how you command attention and convey confidence.
It's about like owning your space and your ideas, right?
Yeah.
I've noticed that when someone stands up to present, everyone's attention is drawn to them. It's like a signal that something important is about to be said.
Precisely. It's a small shift in body language,
Yeah.
but it can really change how people see you and what you have to say. And another important thing is storytelling.
Oh, okay. Storytelling. How does that fit in with software architecture? I usually think of stories as like, novels or movies, not technical diagrams and code.
You'd be surprised how powerful storytelling can be when you're trying to explain technical concepts. People are just naturally drawn to stories. They help us understand complex information, remember the key points, and connect with each other on an emotional level.
Yeah.
When you can tell a compelling story around the architectural choices you made, it's much easier for people to understand and support your vision.
That makes a lot of sense. So instead of just giving people a dry list of features and functions,
Right.
you're giving them a reason to care. You're helping them see the bigger picture.
Exactly.
And how it all fits together.
Yeah.
Do you have any tips for crafting a good architectural story? Like, how do you even start?
One of the best ways to begin is to focus on the problem that you're trying to solve.
Okay.
What challenges are you facing? What are those pain points you're trying to address? By starting with a clear problem statement,
Yeah.
you grab your audience's attention right away,
Right.
and you give them a reason to care about your solution.
So start with the why before jumping into the how. Okay. And then I imagine you bring in the technical details, but in a way that connects back to the problem and shows how your solution solves it.
Precisely.
And maybe throw in an analogy or two
Sure.
to make those technical concepts easier to understand.
Like the Vasa ship we talked about
Yeah,
earlier.
exactly.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've talked about the importance of technical expertise,
Yeah.
balancing all those demands, understanding the business side of things, and communicating effectively. That's a lot.
It is.
It sounds like being a software architect, you need a whole range of skills and a very adaptable mindset.
You definitely do. But we're just getting started.
Oh.
Your source material goes on to talk about navigating complexity and uncertainty, which is a whole other set of challenges that architects face every day.
That sounds like a perfect place to pick up in the next part of our deep dive. We're going to take a closely look at how to deal with those real-world situations where, things don't always go as planned.
Sounds good.
Awesome. We'll be back in a flash. Okay, so we're back and ready to tackle the next big challenge in software architecture,
Yeah.
navigating complexity and uncertainty.
Oh, for sure.
It seems like every software project I've ever worked on has been this like whirlwind of unexpected twists and turns. Is that just how it is, or is there like a way to actually tame the chaos?
Well, I think the first step is just to acknowledge that complexity and uncertainty, those are just part of software development.
Yeah.
We can't pretend they don't exist, and we can't try to eliminate them completely.
Right.
In fact, Edward Gerson, he argues that heterogeneity wins.
Okay.
What he means is we're always going to be dealing with all these different systems and technologies and requirements, and it's that diversity that often leads to complexity.
Right.
But it also brings, richness and flexibility.
Yeah.
So instead of fighting against the mess, we need to figure out how to work with it.
Embrace the mess. I like that. But how do you actually do that? It's easy to say, but in practice, it always feels like I'm, constantly battling against entropy, trying to keep things from spiraling out of control.
It's a constant challenge. One thing that I found helpful comes from Kevlin Henney.
Okay.
He says to prioritize simplicity over generality. It's tempting to try to build the most comprehensive solution right away.
Oh, yeah.
But that can lead to over-engineering and all this unnecessary complexity.
Right.
Instead, focus on building the simplest thing that can actually work for the problem you have right now.
Yeah.
You can always add more features and functionality later on as you need them.
That reminds me of the walking skeleton concept we talked about earlier.
Yes.
Start with the bare bones, the essential structure,
Yeah.
and then kind of flesh it out gradually as you go.
It's a much more manageable approach,
Yeah,
especially when there's a lot of uncertainty.
for sure.
And speaking of uncertainty, Dave Quick argues that we should use it as a driver rather than a roadblock.
Yeah.
So instead of trying to predict the future and design for every possible scenario,
Right.
we should acknowledge that things will change and build systems that are flexible and adaptable.
Okay. I like that idea, using uncertainty as like fuel instead of a brake.
Exactly.
But how do you design for that kind of flexibility?
Yeah.
Isn't there a risk of ending up with a system that's so generic that it's not really useful for anything?
That's a valid concern.
Yeah.
That's where Eric Dornenberg's concept of the 1,000-foot view comes in.
Mhm.
He emphasizes the importance of visualizing system quality at different levels of abstraction.
Okay.
It's like being able to zoom in and out, seeing both the big picture and the details.
Right.
For example, a simple dependency graph can show you how the different parts of the system are connected
Yeah.
and where potential bottlenecks might be. Or a metric visualization can help you identify areas for improvement.
It's like having different lenses to look at the system from.
Exactly.
That way you're less likely to get lost in the weeds
Right.
or miss the forest for the trees.
You got it. It's about finding that sweet spot between being too rigid and too abstract.
Right.
You want a system that can handle change, but is also concrete enough to solve those real problems.
Okay. That makes sense.
But let's shift gears for a bit and talk about some of the more practical advice that these excerpts offer.
Okay.
One piece of advice that really stood out to me was Eben Hewitt's statement, don't be a problem solver.
Wait, what? Isn't that what software architects do? They solve problems? That seems kind of counterintuitive.
I know, right? It sounds strange.
Yeah.
But his point is, we often jump into solution road too quickly.
Okay.
Before we really thought about the problem itself,
Mm-hmm.
we get so focused on finding the answer that we forget to ask the right questions.
I see.
We need to step back and really challenge the assumptions behind the problem.
Okay.
Are we solving the right problem? Is there a better way to frame the challenge? Sometimes the best solution isn't even about finding a technical fix.
Yeah.
It's about reframing the problem completely.
That's a really interesting perspective. So sometimes the best solution is to not solve the problem at all,
Right.
but to find a way to work around it or maybe make it irrelevant.
Exactly.
It's about being strategic and focusing on what really matters.
That's it.
I like that.
And that shift in thinking from solving to framing, it reminds me of this idea of building versus growing systems, which we touched on before.
Right.
Bill DeHora talks about how systems should evolve kind of organically,
Yeah.
adapting to those changing needs and circumstances.
It's like the difference between building a bridge and cultivating a garden.
Ooh, I like that.
With a bridge, you need that detailed plan from the start.
Right.
But with a garden, you can start small, let it grow organically, and adapt as you go.
I love that analogy. You wouldn't try to design every flower and leaf in advance. Right.
Exactly. And Clint Schenk's concept of the walking skeleton fits perfectly here.
It does.
It's about starting with a minimal viable product.
Right.
Something that shows that core functionality.
And then you add features as you learn more.
So it's a much more agile and adaptable approach.
Absolutely. Especially in today's world where change is constant.
Speaking of change, Doug Crawford makes a great point about designing systems that can handle it gracefully.
Yes.
He talks about building in flexibility and resilience right from the start.
Absolutely crucial. And Kamal Wickramayanak reminds us we need to think about the hardware too.
Right.
Software doesn't just exist out there on its own.
Yeah.
It runs on physical infrastructure.
Of course.
And that can change over time.
Right.
We need to be able to anticipate how the system will scale, how it will be deployed, and how it will be maintained over time.
It's like building a house on a solid foundation.
Yes.
If the foundation is weak, the whole structure is at risk.
Exactly.
It doesn't matter how beautiful the house is.
That's right. And that brings us to some of the deeper ideas in these excerpts.
Okay.
One that struck me was Einar Landra's observation that programming is an act of design. He's saying that software development isn't just about engineering.
Right.
It's also a creative process,
Interesting.
a process of discovery and learning.
It's like we're creating something new.
Exactly.
Something that's never existed before.
And that takes a different mindset than traditional engineering.
Yeah.
We need to be comfortable with ambiguity and experimentation and even failure.
That's a good point.
And speaking of failure, Greg Nyberg warns us about chasing perfection.
Oh.
He says that striving for a perfect system can actually lead to over-designed and overly complex solutions.
Yeah, I've definitely been there.
It's better to aim for good enough and recognize when you've achieved it.
So know when to stop and move on.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that ties in with another thing to watch out for.
Okay.
Falling in love with your own ideas or getting too attached to certain technologies.
Right.
Zubin Wadia, he stresses the importance of focusing on the content, the data,
Yeah.
the heart of the system.
And a core.
He warns against getting so lost in the technical details that we lose sight of what really matters.
So don't get so focused on the tools that you forget about the actual task.
Exactly.
Okay.
And Chad Levine reminds us that the business is the reason we do this.
Right.
We can't let our technical expertise blind us to the needs of the business.
We have to listen to them.
Yes, we need to listen to them, understand them, and respect those business domain experts.
So it's about being a partner,
Exactly.
not just a service provider.
That's right.
And that requires humility and a willingness to collaborate.
It does.
And speaking of collaboration, exactly. And Mike Brown has this great point about being able to code what you design.
Interesting.
If you can't code it yourself, he says, you don't really understand the complexities.
Makes sense.
That hands-on experience is crucial for making good architectural decisions.
I completely agree. It's one thing to design on paper.
Yeah.
But actually implementing it and seeing how it works in the real world.
Right.
That's where you really learn what works and what doesn't.
It's like the difference between reading a cookbook and actually cooking a meal.
Exactly.
You can have all the theory, but until you get your hands dirty, you won't really get it.
And that experience can help you make better design decisions.
Absolutely.
And catch potential problems early on.
Okay, so we've talked about hands-on experience.
Yeah.
Let's talk about something else every software architect has to deal with. Scope creep.
Oh, the dreaded scope creep.
Right. Dave Quick calls scope the enemy of success.
It really can be.
And I think he's right. Scope creep can quickly turn a manageable project into a total nightmare.
It's true. You have to be really careful about setting clear boundaries, realistic expectations, and ruthless prioritization.
Sometimes you have to say no to good ideas.
You do, just to stay focused on what's truly essential.
It's about choosing your battles wisely.
Exactly. You can't solve every problem.
Right.
You have to focus on what matters most.
And Sam Gardner has this great point about working around problems rather than always trying to solve them head on.
Oh, interesting. Tell me more.
He talks about defining clear boundaries and creating these like stable, self-contained problem chunks.
It's smart.
It's like creating fire breaks in a forest.
I see.
If something goes wrong, you can contain the damage.
That's a much more robust and resilient approach.
It is, and it makes the problem feel less daunting.
Yeah.
Instead of facing this huge, overwhelming challenge, you break it down into smaller pieces.
I like that.
That you can handle one at a time.
That's a good strategy.
And Brian Hart reminds us that even with the best strategies, success ultimately comes down to diligence and attention to detail.
He's right.
He emphasizes documenting decisions, communicating clearly, and making sure those architectural principles are actually implemented correctly.
It's about being thorough in every step of the process.
The devil is in the details.
Right. One small oversight can have huge consequences.
Exactly. It can undermine the whole system.
Speaking of things that can have cascading effects, let's talk about technical debt again.
Oh, yes. Technical debt. We talked about it earlier, but it's worth another look.
It's a big one.
It's such a common challenge.
Bert Hufnagel compares technical debt to financial debt.
Okay.
You know, with interest accruing in the form of instability, higher maintenance costs, and reduced agility.
It's like taking out a loan.
Yeah.
That you'll eventually have to pay back.
And the longer you wait, the more it costs you.
Exactly. So we need to think about the long-term consequences of our decisions and factor in the cost of maintaining and evolving the system over time.
Sometimes it's better to invest more effort up front to create a cleaner, more sustainable solution.
But even if it means delaying the release a bit.
Exactly. It's about finding that balance between short-term gains and long-term sustainability.
And speaking of things that can change over time, let's talk about keeping up with the constantly changing technology landscape.
Yeah, that's a big one.
Richard Monson-Haefel reminds us that we can't future-proof our solutions.
We can try.
Yeah, but technology moves too fast.
It does.
Today's hot new thing is tomorrow's legacy system.
That's true.
So we need to design systems that are adaptable and extensible.
Absolutely. We can't predict the future, but we can build systems that are flexible enough to handle change.
It's like instead of building a fortress, we need to build a ship that can navigate changing seas.
I love that. It brings us back to the human element of software architecture, which we've been talking about throughout this whole discussion.
Yeah, it's not just about the tech, it's about the people, too.
Exactly. Norman Carnevale reminds us that people aren't always thrilled about new systems or big upgrades.
That's true.
So we need to understand their concerns and address them.
And help them through the transition.
Exactly. It's about recognizing that software architecture is about people, too.
It's about understanding how our decisions affect the people who will use the systems we build.
Yes. We need to be empathetic
Yeah.
and really listen to their needs.
And even Hewitt uses a really interesting analogy to make this point.
Okay.
He compares refining a consommé
Oh, right.
to the process of clarifying requirements and architectural concepts.
Interesting.
It's about stripping away the unnecessary stuff.
The impurities.
Exactly.
And getting to the essence of the system.
It's like you're carefully selecting and refining those ingredients to create something elegant and flavorful.
You got it. And Bill DeHora uses another analogy to drive this home.
Okay.
He talks about how great software isn't built, it's grown.
Hmm.
He compares it to cultivating a garden. You start with a small seed and nurture it over time.
I like that a lot.
It emphasizes the organic nature of software and the importance of letting it evolve.
We need to be patient and observant.
Absolutely.
And adjust our approach as we go.
And Peter Gillard Moss reminds us that the final product never looks exactly like the initial design.
Right?
We need to be flexible and adapt to new information.
The design is just a starting point.
Exactly.
The real journey starts when we start building.
That's when the learning really happens.
And run into all those unexpected challenges and opportunities.
For sure.
Speaking of challenges, let's talk about getting buy-in and securing funding for architectural initiatives.
Yeah, that's a real-world challenge.
Yu gives some good advice here.
Okay.
He says it's important to make a strong business case.
Right.
Show the value of good architecture.
Yeah.
And find the right time to present your ideas.
Timing is everything.
It is. It's about understanding the language of business and explaining the benefits of good architecture in terms that stakeholders care about.
Not just about technical detail.
Right. It's about business value,
Yeah.
risk mitigation, and return on investment.
And sometimes the best way to get buy-in is to just wait
Wait for what?
for the right moment,
Okay.
when the need for a better solution is really obvious.
Ah, I see.
Maybe the current system is falling apart,
Right.
or a competitor is doing something innovative.
So you let the pain point become more acute.
Exactly. That's when people are ready for change
They're more receptive.
and more willing to invest.
Okay, that makes sense. So let's talk about data.
Okay.
Chad Levine reminds us that control of the data is just as important as control of the code.
That's a crucial point. We often get so focused on the code that we forget about the data,
Yeah,
which is often the most valuable asset in the system.
right.
Levine emphasizes the need for version control, automated testing, and a solid deployment process for data changes.
Just like with code changes.
Exactly. Data changes can also introduce bugs and instability.
So we wouldn't make changes to the code without testing and version control.
Right.
So why would we do that with the data?
It's the lifeblood of the system.
We need to manage it carefully.
Absolutely. And we need to think about the operability and supportability of the data management system.
Make sure it's easy to troubleshoot and maintain.
Exactly.
So it's about having a holistic view of data management,
Yes.
integrating it into the overall architecture,
Right.
making sure it's treated as a first-class citizen.
And Keith Braithwaite talks about building systems that are ready to hand,
Okay,
seamlessly integrated into the user's workflow.
so they become almost invisible in their functionality.
Exactly. They just work effortlessly and intuitively.
That's the ultimate goal,
It is.
to build systems that are both powerful and invisible.
That's it. It's about finding that sweet spot between complexity and simplicity,
Right.
power and usability.
Foresight and adaptability.
You got it.
Wow, we've covered a lot of ground in this part of our deep dive. We've talked about embracing complexity and uncertainty, designing for change, the importance of hands-on experience, the dangers of scope creep and technical debt, and remembering the human element in all of this.
It's a lot to take in.
It is, but it's also valuable for anyone who wants to be a better software architect.
Absolutely.
Okay, so we're back for the final part of our deep dive into software architecture.
It's amazing how these excerpts have taken us on such a journey, right? From technical stuff to like the philosophy of design and how our decisions impact people.
Yeah, it really shows how much goes into being a software architect.
It's not just about the code.
No, it's about the big picture, the
Yeah.
people and the impact these systems have.
And speaking of the big picture, one thing that I found interesting was this concept of building systems to be Zuhanden.
User-Centric.
Yeah, it's from Heidegger's philosophy.
Okay.
It describes systems that are so well integrated into our lives, we don't even notice them.
Like what?
Like a good door handle. You just reach out and open the door without thinking about it, right?
Right.
The door handle just becomes an extension of what you want to do.
It just works.
Exactly.
So for software, it's about building systems that are so easy to use, they kind of fade into the background.
Right.
They empower users without getting in the way.
You got it. And it's not about making things overly simple.
No.
It's about reaching a level of, sophistication, where complexity is hidden under this layer of simplicity.
So the system just works.
Effortlessly.
That reminds me of what Vinayak Hegde said about the interface being the system for the user.
Yeah.
They don't see the code or the architecture, just the interface.
Right.
And that's what shapes their whole experience.
Exactly.
Yeah.
We can build these super elegant systems and optimize for performance and all that.
Yeah.
But if the interface is clunky and confusing, no one's going to use it.
Right. So it's a waste.
It is. The user experience is everything.
It really shows how important it is to invest in good interface design.
Absolutely.
And to get users involved early on.
Yes. From the very beginning.
So you understand their needs and how they work.
And create interfaces that feel natural.
That just makes sense.
Right.
And that brings us back to this idea that software architecture is an ongoing process.
It's not a one-time thing.
George Melamides talks about the ROI variable. He says that every decision has a cost and a potential return on investment, but that ROI can change over time as the system evolves and the business changes too.
That's a great point. We can't just make a decision and assume it'll always be the best choice.
So we need to constantly reevaluate our choices.
Exactly. We need to consider the context, the long-term effects, and the potential for things to change in the future.
And sometimes that means revisiting decisions that we thought were good at the time.
Sometimes you have to go back and rethink things.
It's about being adaptable.
Yeah.
And responding to those changes.
That's software development.
Right. And Eric Hawthorne talks about choosing frameworks that play well with others.
Oh, that's important.
He says to use technologies that are modular and interoperable.
And well documented.
So we don't get locked into something that becomes a burden later.
Exactly. We need to think about the long term when making these choices.
It's like choosing building materials. You want stuff that's durable and adaptable.
Right, and compatible with other systems.
You wouldn't want something that's going to rot or that can't be connected to the plumbing.
Good point.
Yeah.
And speaking of building a solid foundation, Chad Levine reminds us that data is just as important as code.
Data is essential.
We need a good data management strategy.
Version control.
Automated testing.
Deployment process.
Data is the lifeblood of the system.
Right. And we need to treat it that way.
Absolutely. We need to think about data integrity, security, and making sure it's accessible.
And then we come back to this idea of systems that are ready to hand.
Yeah. Seamlessly integrated.
Like we talked about with Keith Braithwaite.
It ties everything together.
It really does. Clarity, simplicity, flexibility, understanding the user.
It's all connected.
It's about building systems that are both powerful and invisible.
That's the goal.
It's been such an amazing journey exploring these ideas with you.
It has. What are some of the key things you're taking away from all of this?
Wow, so many things. But if I had to pick a few, I'd say understanding the business context, balancing priorities, clear communication, and embracing all that complexity and uncertainty.
Great.
And realizing that software architecture is really a human endeavor.
It is.
It's about collaboration and empathy and a willingness to keep learning.
Those are great insights. And remember, technology changes, but the fundamental principles of good design, clear communication, and understanding people, those are always going to be important.
It's been a real pleasure diving deep into this with you.
Thanks for having me. I always enjoy these conversations.
Until next time, keep diving deep, keep learning, and keep building amazing things.